Abigail Whitaker did not cry at her own wedding. Not when the church doors closed and her brother still hadn't come. Not when the man beside her leaned down and told her she would learn to kneel before winter's end. She stood straight, her hands folded over the secret sewn beneath her dress, and she smiled the way a woman smiles when she has already decided how the story ends. If you've ever had to walk into the lion's den just to save someone you love, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow every part until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The preacher's voice filled the old stone church like water rising in a flooded room, slow, steady, and impossible to escape. Abigail Whitaker stood at the altar in a dress the color of cream and old bone, her dark hair pinned tight beneath a veil that had belonged to her mother. The church was packed. Half of Maryland had come, it seemed, to witness the union of the Whitaker name with the Blackwood fortune. They smiled. They fanned themselves in the summer heat. They murmured behind gloved hands about what a fine thing it was the disgraced merchant's daughter cleaned up and delivered like a gift to the most powerful family in the county. Abigail kept her eyes on the preacher. She did not look at the man beside her. Nathaniel Blackwood stood 6 feet tall, with the posture of a man who had never once been told no. He was not unhandsome, she had accepted that much without bitterness. Strong jaw, dark eyes, a mouth that looked like it had been carved for commands rather than conversation. He wore a coat the color of midnight. His gloves were white. He had not smiled once since she entered the church. Neither had she. The preacher read from Ephesians. About wives, about submission, about the sacred bond between man and woman ordained by God and recognized by the Commonwealth of Maryland. That was when Nathaniel leaned close. His voice was low enough that only she could hear it beneath the scripture and the rustling of silk fans. "Before this winter ends," he said, "you will learn to kneel." Abigail did not flinch. She did not turn to look at him. She let the words settle into the air between them, the way smoke settles inevitable present already beginning to disperse. Then she said quietly and without a tremor, "I buried fear the year my father lost everything. That was 4 winters ago, Mr. Blackwood. You're a little late." She felt him go still beside her. The preacher kept reading. She had known this man by reputation long before she knew him by name. In Virginia, where the Whitaker family had once kept a respectable house near the Blue Ridge foothills, the name Blackwood was spoken the way people speak about bad weather, with resignation, not surprise. Nathaniel's father, Edmund Blackwood, had been a land baron. His uncle, Judge Elias Blackwood, sat on the circuit court and had the kind of influence that didn't announce itself. It simply appeared already decided in every document that mattered. It was Judge Blackwood who had presided over her father's case. It was Edmund Blackwood's testimony that had sealed it. Thomas Whitaker. Honest, careful, methodical. Thomas Whitaker, who kept his ledgers in a hand so precise it looked like printed type, had been found guilty of defrauding 7 investors in a land speculation scheme he had never agreed to join. The men who accused him walked free. The money disappeared into accounts no one examined too closely. And Thomas Whitaker had died 2 years after the verdict, not in prison, but close enough to it stripped of his land, his credit, his name, and finally his health, in a rented room in Richmond, with a single candle burning on the table beside him. Abigail had been 19 years old the night her father died. She was 23 now, standing at this altar, wearing the dress, and playing the part she had spent 4 years preparing to play. Her brother Samuel had found the papers. That was the part nobody knew. Nobody except her. Samuel was 3 years older than Abigail, quieter and slower to anger, but twice as stubborn. He had spent 2 years tracing the original land transactions following the paper trail her father had left behind, not evidence of guilt, but evidence of manipulation. The real scheme had been organized by Edmund Blackwood and his associates. Thomas Whitaker had been brought in late, his name added to documents he had never signed, willingly his seal used on agreements he had flagged as irregular. When the scheme collapsed, the Blackwoods had pointed at the smallest fish in the pond and called him the shark. Samuel had the proof. He had written to her 3 weeks before this wedding. He had promised he would arrive before the ceremony with the documents in hand. She had sewn his letter into the lining of her dress. She could feel it now against her ribs as the preacher asked Nathaniel Blackwood if he took this woman. "I do," Nathaniel said. Clear, final, like a man signing a deed. The preacher turned to her. Abigail looked at the church doors at the back of the hall. Still closed, still no Samuel. Something had gone wrong. She knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the first cloud appears. A pressure, a stillness, a change in the quality of the air. "And do you, Abigail Ann Whitaker, take this man?" "I do," she said. She did not speak to Nathaniel during the wedding supper. There was no shortage of others willing to fill the silence. His cousins from Annapolis, 3 of his business associates from Baltimore, the wives of every prominent man in the county, they circled her like satellites around a new planet, studying her, testing her orbit. "You must be so relieved," said a woman named Mrs. Pemberton, who wore a hat with 3 feathers and had the smile of someone who had never experienced a consequence in her life. "After everything your poor family has been through, Mr. Blackwood is enormously generous to have made this arrangement." Abigail looked at her pleasantly. "He is indeed." "Your father," Mrs. Pemberton began. "Passed 2 years ago," Abigail said. "Yes, he was a good man. The truth of that will outlast any verdict." Mrs. Pemberton's smile stiffened at the edges. "Of course." A man across the table, one of Nathaniel's associates, a heavy-set fellow named Crawford, laughed softly into his wine. "The girl has steel in her, Blackwood. You've got your hands full." Nathaniel, who had been watching Abigail from the head of the table with an expression she could not decode, said nothing. He lifted his glass. He drank. After the supper ended and the guests began to drift toward their carriages, Nathaniel found her standing near the door of the hall, her back straight, her eyes on the dark road beyond the window. "You're watching for something," he said. "Someone," she said. "Your brother." She turned to look at him. She hadn't expected him to know. "Yes, he was seen this morning," Nathaniel said, "on the road from Fredericksburg. He hadn't arrived by the time the ceremony began. I assumed you were aware." "I was aware," she said. "And you proceeded anyway." "I did." He studied her. In the candlelight, she could see something working behind his eyes. Not warmth, not admiration, but a kind of cautious recalibration. Like a man who had purchased a horse and was beginning to suspect it was a different breed than advertised. "Why?" he asked. Abigail faced him fully. "Because the ceremony was not the goal, Mr. Blackwood. It was the door." She walked away before he could respond. They rode to Blackwood Hall that evening in separate carriages. Nathaniel had business to attend to in town, or so he said. He would follow in 2 days. In the meantime, she would be settled at the estate by his housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Holt, who met Abigail at the front entrance with the kind of professional courtesy that communicated nothing about personal opinion. "Mrs. Blackwood," the woman said, "welcome to Blackwood Hall." It was the first time anyone had called her that. Abigail nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Holt. I'm very glad to be here." She meant it entirely, though not in the way Mrs. Holt would have assumed. The house was large and old, and built in the manner of Maryland plantation houses, brick facade, wide center hall rooms that opened off each side like ribs off a spine. It smelled of beeswax and old wood, and something underneath both of those things, something that reminded Abigail of documents left in closed rooms for too long. She was shown to her room, which was on the second floor east side, with a window that looked over the rear grounds and a writing table positioned near the fireplace. She unpacked her own trunk. She thanked the housemaid who offered to help and sent her away gently. Then she sat at the writing table, smoothed a sheet of paper, and wrote 3 letters. The first was to Samuel, directed to the last address he had given her, a boarding house in Fredericksburg. She kept it short. "I am here. I am well. Tell me where you are." The second was to Dr. Emmett Raines in Alexandria, a man who had been her father's physician and who she trusted to be discreet. She told him that her brother may have been injured on the road and asked him to make inquiries. The third letter she folded and set aside without sealing. That one was for Nathaniel. She wasn't ready to send it yet. She needed to know more first. The next 3 days, Abigail did not waste a single hour. She woke before the household and walked the grounds in the early morning heat. She learned the estate's layout, which fields were tenanted, and which were left fallow, where the equipment was stored, how far the property ran toward the creek. She ate her meals in the dining room and asked Mrs. Holt questions about the household in the tone of a new mistress, taking her rightful interest in her home. She was courteous. She was composed. She paid attention. By the second evening, she knew which rooms were kept locked. There were 3: a storage room off the kitchen, a door on the 3rd floor that had been painted shut from the outside, and a room at the far end of the east wing that Mrs. Holt referred to simply as Mr. Blackwood Sr.'s study, with the particular finality that indicated no further questions were expected. On the 3rd morning, a man arrived at the back gate. He said his name was Caleb, and that he had a message for Mrs. Blackwood from her brother. Abigail met him in the kitchen, away from the other servants, with the door closed and her hands folded on the table. "Where is he?" she asked. Caleb was younger than Samuel, perhaps 20, with a bruised jaw and the nervous energy of someone who had ridden hard and slept little. "River Road," he said, "south of Upper Marlborough. He's at a farmhouse. A woman named Decker took him in. Was he hurt?" Caleb looked at the table. "Yes, ma'am." Abigail kept her voice level. "How badly?" "Ribs, arm, his head. He was beaten on the road 2 nights before your wedding. His satchel was taken." Caleb hesitated. "The papers, ma'am. Whatever he was carrying. They took all of it." For a long moment Abigail sat without speaking. Then she said, "Is he conscious?" "Yes, ma'am. He sent me himself. Said to tell you." Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, small and crumpled, as though it had been carried in a clenched fist. "Said to tell you he's sorry. That he failed you." Abigail took the paper. She opened it. Samuel's handwriting, unsteady, pressed harder in some letters than others. The hand of a man writing through pain said, "Only I lost them. But I remember everything. Every name. Every number. It's still here. Give me time." She folded the paper and placed it in her pocket. "You'll be fed and rested before you go back," she told Caleb. "Tell my brother he hasn't failed anything. Tell him to stay where he is and heal. Tell him—" She paused. "Tell him the door is already open. He just needs to walk through it when he's ready." Caleb nodded. "Yes, ma'am." That evening, Abigail went to Edmund Blackwood's study. She had borrowed the key from the ring Mrs. Holt kept on her chatelaine, not stolen, not forced. She had simply waited until Mrs. Holt set the ring on the kitchen table while she kneaded dough, and she had lifted the smallest key, memorized its shape against her palm, and returned it within 20 minutes of having a copy fashioned by the estate's smithy, who asked no questions when the new mistress of the house made a request. The room smelled exactly the way she had expected: old paper dust, cedarwood, and a faint ghost of pipe tobacco. The desk was massive dark walnut, with a surface as wide and unforgiving as a judge's bench. The shelves behind it held ledgers, arranged by year, going back to 1790. Abigail lit her lamp and began. She was not searching wildly. She had a method, the same method her father had taught her when she was 12 years old, and he had allowed her to help him reconcile the merchant accounts each spring. "You begin with the year a thing went wrong," he had told her, "and you read backward until you find the year it was planned." She began with 1811, the year of the trial. She moved to 1810, then 1809. It was in a ledger labeled 1808 that she found the first name she recognized. Elias Blackwood, written in Edmund's careful hand, beside a figure that matched almost exactly a figure her father had mentioned in his last letter before the verdict, a sum he had been asked to guarantee on behalf of an investment he had never approved. She kept reading. By the time the lamp began to gutter, she had found 3 more entries. Correspondence references. Dates. A record of a meeting in Annapolis that her father had attended, and beside it, in different ink and different handwriting, added later, She was nearly certain a notation that Thomas Whitaker had proposed the scheme. He had not proposed it. She knew that because she knew her father's handwriting too, and the notation was not his. Someone had added it after the fact. She closed the ledger. She sat for a long moment in the dark study, with the lamplight dying around her, and the summer night pressing hot and still against the windows. Then she opened the letter she had written 3 days ago and sealed it. She read it once more. Mr. Blackwood, come home. There is a truth in your house that will either save you or destroy you, the choice of which is still yours to make. I will wait. She sealed it and left it on the hall table for the morning post. Nathaniel arrived 2 days later in the late afternoon when the heat had settled into the grounds like something permanent. He came into the house without ceremony, handed his coat to the housemaid, and found Abigail in the front parlor with a book open in her lap that she had not been reading. He looked different than he had at the wedding. Not softer, there was nothing soft about Nathaniel Blackwood she was beginning to understand. But something in his carriage had shifted. He was holding himself the way a man holds himself when he has been thinking about something he doesn't want to have been thinking about. You wrote to me, he said. I did. You could have written that it was about Samuel. I would have come sooner. It isn't only about Samuel, she said. Sit down, Mr. Blackwood. He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room with his hands behind his back, watching her the way a man watches a river he isn't sure he can ford. What truth? He said. The letter said there was a truth in this house. Abigail set her book aside. She rose from the chair and looked at him steadily. My brother was beaten 2 nights before our wedding, she said. The documents he was carrying, documents that concerned your family and mine, were taken from him. He nearly died on the road near Upper Marlborough. He is alive, but he is injured, and what he was carrying is gone. Nathaniel's expression did not change exactly, but something behind it shifted like a weight moving to a different shelf. What documents? It was not a question. The way he said it told her that he already had some shape of the answer. Proof, she said, that my father did not commit the fraud he was convicted of. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it, not empty, but full of things neither party is saying yet. That is a serious claim, Nathaniel said finally. Yes, she said. It is. And you believe you have found something in this house to support it? I know I have, she said. I found it in your father's study. He went very still. You were in my father's study, he said. I was. That room is locked. I am the mistress of this house, she said evenly. There is no room in it that is locked to me. For a moment she genuinely did not know what he would do. She had calculated for several possibilities: anger, denial, threat. She had not calculated for what actually happened, which was that Nathaniel Blackwood crossed to the nearest chair and sat down in it as though his legs had made the decision without consulting the rest of him. He put his elbows on his knees. He looked at the floor. Show me, he said. Abigail looked at him for a long moment. Not tonight, she said. Tonight you'll eat supper and you'll sleep in your own house, and in the morning when your head is clear, I'll show you everything I found. He looked up at her. Why wait? Because, she said, what I'm going to show you will change everything you believe about your own name, and I would rather you see it rested than see it broken. He stared at her. She met his eyes without flinching. All right, he said at last. He rose from the chair. All right. He walked to the door of the parlor. He stopped with his hand on the frame and didn't turn around. Did you know, he asked, before the wedding, did you know what you'd find here? I knew what I was looking for, she said. I didn't know if it was here to be found. And if it hadn't been. She considered that. Then I would have looked somewhere else. He was quiet for a long moment. You married me to get into this house, he said. Not accusing, not angry. Something else. Something closer to a man reading a map and realizing he had misunderstood the territory entirely. I married you, Abigail said. Because your house had the door my father could never open." Nathaniel didn't respond. He walked out. Abigail stood alone in the parlor, in the last light of the summer evening. One hand pressed flat against the front of her dress, against the place where Samuel's letter still rested against her ribs. She had not cried in 4 years. She did not cry now. She simply stood there and breathed in and out steady as a woman who has made her plan and intends to see it through and waited for morning to come. Morning came in hot and still the way summer mornings did in Maryland when the air had no intention of moving. Abigail was already dressed and waiting at the door of Edmund Blackwood's study when Nathaniel came down the hall. He had not slept well, she could see that plainly. There were shadows under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there the night before, the look of a man who had spent the dark hours fighting a battle inside his own head and wasn't sure yet who had won. He stopped when he saw her standing there with the key in her hand. "You could have gone in without me," he said. "I could have," she said. "I waited." He looked at her for a moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then he nodded once, and she unlocked the door. She had left the ledger open on the desk, exactly where she had found it. She hadn't moved a single paper. She wanted him to see it the way she had seen it, undisturbed, uninterpreted, still belonging to the room. Nathaniel crossed to the desk. He looked down at the open page. He didn't speak for a long time. "That's my father's hand," he said finally. His voice was careful the way a man is careful when he is walking on ice and can feel it shifting under his weight. "Yes," Abigail said. "The entries on the left column match the figures from my father's trial record almost exactly." She moved to stand beside the desk, not beside him, but close enough that he could hear her clearly. "The sum listed under your uncle's name in November of 1808 is within $40 of the amount my father was accused of misappropriating in 1811. The same sum, the same timeline, but recorded here in this house 3 years before my father ever appeared in that courtroom." Nathaniel turned a page, then another. He stopped. "This notation," he said. "This one here in the margin. Added later," she said. "The ink is different. The pressure of the hand is different. Whoever wrote it was writing fast or writing angry or writing afraid." He set the ledger down. He pressed both hands flat on the desk and stared at it. "You're saying my father falsified a court record," he said. "I'm saying your father and your uncle built a fraud and then built a man to take the blame for it." Abigail kept her voice level. "My father was convenient. He was an outsider. He had no family connections in Maryland powerful enough to fight back. He asked questions about the scheme, early on questions your father recorded right here, and instead of answering them, they made him the answer." Nathaniel pushed back from the desk. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, his hands loose at his sides. "You have known this," he said, "since before the wedding." "I have suspected it since before the wedding. I knew where to look because my brother spent 2 years following the paper trail. The documents Samuel was carrying would have made this irrefutable. Without them—" She paused. "What I have found here is strong. It is not yet enough to take to a court." He turned around. "Not yet." "Not yet," she agreed. The silence between them was different from the night before. Less guarded. More dangerous in the way that honesty is always a little dangerous between two people who have not yet decided whether to trust each other. "Why are you telling me this?" Nathaniel said. "You could have taken what you found and gone to another court, another judge, bypassed me entirely." "I could have." "Then why—" "Because you are not your father," Abigail said, "and I won't know if that's true until you prove it." Nay. He left the study without another word. For 3 hours, Abigail didn't see him. She heard him twice his boots on the floorboards above her, the sound of drawers opening and closing in some room she hadn't yet explored. She stayed in the parlor, and she did not go looking for him. She had laid the truth on the table. What he did with it was for the moment his. Mrs. Holt brought her tea at 9:30 and set it down with the particular expression of a woman who knew that something significant was happening in the house and had decided that the wisest course was to continue making tea. "Is Mr. Blackwood well?" Abigail asked. "He's in the East Room," Mrs. Holt said carefully, going through his father's correspondence boxes. Abigail wrapped both hands around her cup. "Thank you, Mrs. Holt." The housekeeper lingered. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, then stopped. Abigail looked up. Mrs. Holt pressed her lips together. She was a woman of perhaps 55, with a square, honest face and hands that showed every year of the work she'd done. "I've worked in this house for 19 years, she said. "I worked for Edmund Blackwood before this one. I knew your father's name before you ever set foot through that door." Abigail went very still. "Did you?" "Everybody in this county knew it," Mrs. Holt said. "The trial was in every paper from here to Annapolis." She glanced toward the door, then back. "I also knew that Thomas Whitaker was the quietest, most careful man who ever walked through a business transaction in the state of Virginia. And I thought so at the time." Abigail set down her cup. "Mrs. Holt, I'm not saying anything I can prove," the woman said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. But if you're looking, and it seems to me that you are—" She stopped again. "There are boxes in the East Room your husband just opened. I put them there myself 15 years ago when Edmund Blackwood told me to burn them, and I could not bring myself to do it." The air in the room changed. "You kept them," Abigail said. "I put them somewhere I would not be asked about them," Mrs. Holt said, "which is not quite the same thing, but close enough perhaps." She smoothed her apron. "I'll bring fresh tea at 11. She left. Abigail stood up and walked toward the East Room at a pace that was not quite running. Nathaniel was on his knees on the floor when she opened the door. Not in any attitude of defeat, he was surrounded by paper 3 open boxes at his sides, and he was reading with the focused intensity of a man who has stopped pretending he doesn't need to know something. He looked up when she entered. "Sit down," he said. His voice had changed. It was quieter, harder in a different way, not cold, but concentrated the way metal is concentrated when it has been through fire. She sat. He held up a letter. "This is dated March of 1809. It is from my uncle Elias to my father. It says—" He looked at the paper. "It says that the Whitaker problem has been managed and that the documentation is in place." He set it down and picked up another. "This one April of the same year. My father to my uncle. He says that Thomas Whitaker has written to him directly, asking to be removed from the investment agreement, and that the request must not be accommodated." He looked at her. "Because accommodating it would require explaining the nature of the agreement." Abigail did not move. "There are 11 letters in this sequence," Nathaniel said. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment, and then lowered it. 11 letters between my father and my uncle over the course of 8 months planning exactly what you said they planned." "Where was Samuel's attack?" he asked. "River Road south of Upper Marlborough. That is 3 miles from my uncle's primary property." The room was very quiet. "He knows," Abigail said. "Your uncle knows that your brother that Samuel was carrying something dangerous. He had him followed. Or he had him watched from the moment the Whitaker name came back into any conversation involving our family." Nathaniel stood up. He was not a man who paced. She was learning he went still when he was thinking the kind of stillness that took up more space than movement. "My uncle is a circuit court judge. He has connections to every county sheriff between here and the Virginia border. If he ordered Samuel attacked, he would have had no shortage of men willing to carry it out," Abigail finished. "And the documents Samuel carried are now either in my uncle's possession or destroyed." "Samuel told me he remembers everything," she said. "Every name, every number. He had them memorized." Nathaniel looked at her. "A man's memory is not a court document." "No," she said, "but it is a place to start." She paused. "The letters in your hand are—" He looked down at the letters he was still holding. He looked at them for a long time. "If I take these to a court," he said slowly, "I am destroying my family's name, everything my father built, my uncle's position, the Blackwood reputation in this state." "Yes," she said, "you are." And you expect me to do this?" Abigail met his eyes. "I don't expect anything from you, Mr. Blackwood. I haven't expected anything from you since the moment I understood who your father was." She leaned forward slightly. "But I am asking you. I am asking you as the woman who walked into your church and stood at your altar and made a vow in front of God and half of Maryland. I am asking you to decide what kind of man you are, not what kind of man your father raised you to be. What kind of man you are." Something crossed his face that she had not seen there before. Something that was not calculation, and not anger, and not the particular pride of a man who has never been refused something that was closer to the expression of a person being asked a question they had never thought to ask themselves. He sat back down on the floor amid the papers and the boxes. He picked up the next letter in the sequence and kept reading. The message came just before noon. A rider arrived at the front gate with a sealed envelope bearing Judge Elias Blackwood's personal mark, the same seal Abigail had seen on documents in the study, pressed in black wax, the letter B above a set of scales. Nathaniel read it standing in the hallway while Abigail watched from the doorway. His expression did not change while he read. Not at the first page, not at the second. When he was finished, he folded it carefully and held it at his side. "My uncle," he said, "is inviting us to dine with him on Friday evening. He writes that he has heard we have settled in comfortably and that he is eager to welcome his new niece to the family." A pause. He also mentions as a footnote that he has received reports of certain inquiries being made in Fredericksburg regarding old court documents. He says he hopes no one is troubling the new household with old unpleasantness. Old unpleasantness. The phrase landed in the hall between them like something thrown. Abigail said, "He knows we're looking." "He knows something prompted looking," Nathaniel said. "He may not know how much we've found." He looked at her. "He wants to see you. He wants to take your measure." "Then let him," she said. Nathaniel folded the letter again, tighter this time. He is not a safe man to underestimate Abigail. It was the first time he had used her given name. Neither of them acknowledged it. "I am not in the habit of underestimating dangerous men," she said. "I married one after all." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one there and gone in less than a second, like a fish breaking the surface of still water. "I'll send the reply," he said. That evening after supper, Nathaniel came to find her in the library. She was at the writing desk, working through a set of corresponding figures she had copied from the ledger, cross-referencing dates, building the sequence of events into a timeline that a court could follow from beginning to end. He sat down in the chair across from her, without being invited. She did not look up from the page. "Samuel," he said, "can he travel?" "Not yet. In another week, perhaps." "I want him brought here," Nathaniel said, "to Blackwood Hall. He'll be safer under this roof than in a farmhouse on an open road." Abigail set her pen down. She looked at him. "Why?" she said. He seemed to find the question worth considering rather than being offended by it. "Because my uncle's people knew where to find him once," he said. "They'll find him again if he stays where he is." "And you believe he'll be safe here?" "I can protect people in my own house," he said. "That much I can still do." She studied him. "You understand that if Samuel is here, and he gives his testimony, his verbal account of what the documents contained, and we combine it with the letters from the East Room, we have a case. A real case. Not just suspicion. Not just my word against your uncle's reputation." "I understand that," he said. "And your uncle will understand it too once Samuel appears under your roof." "Yes," he said. "He will." "That makes things more dangerous." "Yes," he said again. "It does." She waited. "Send for him," Nathaniel said. "Send Caleb back, or whoever you trust. Bring Samuel here." He stood up. "Tell him he'll have a room and a doctor, and as much time as he needs." Abigail looked at him for one long moment, at this man she had married as a calculated move on a board game she had been playing alone for 4 years. This man whose father had destroyed hers. This man who was now sitting in his dead father's library deciding whether to tear his entire inheritance apart at the seam. "All right," she said. She picked up her pen and reached for a fresh sheet of paper. "Thank you," she said. She kept her eyes on the page. "I know what this costs you." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet and without decoration, the voice of a man speaking plainly, because he no longer sees the use of speaking any other way. "My father used to tell me," he said, "that a Blackwood's name was worth more than any other man's deed, that our word was law because the law had always recognized us as its authors." He paused. "I believed him for a long time. It is a very comfortable thing to believe." Abigail kept writing. "I trusted him," Nathaniel said. "I trusted him completely, and he built everything I am on someone else's grave." She lifted the pen. She looked at him. He was standing near the doorway with his hands at his sides and his face carrying the particular weight of a man who has just put down something he has been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "You didn't put Thomas Whitaker in that grave," she said, "and you don't have to stay in it with him." Nathaniel looked at her. Then he said, "Get some sleep, Mrs. Blackwood. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He left. Abigail sat alone in the library with the lamp burning low, and the timeline spread across the desk in front of her. Every name, every date, every figure lined up in order, the whole crooked architecture of a lie that had been standing for years, and she kept writing until the lamp went out. 3 days later, Samuel arrived at Blackwood Hall. He came in a covered wagon, lying flat with 2 blankets over him, and Caleb riding beside him the whole way. Abigail heard the wheels on the gravel drive and was at the front entrance before the wagon had stopped moving. She pulled back the canvas, and her brother looked up at her. He had lost weight. His left arm was splinted from wrist to elbow. There was a healing gash along his hairline that had been stitched badly and was only now beginning to close properly. His eyes, though his eyes were the same, clear and stubborn and slightly apologetic, the way they had always been when he knew he had fallen short of something he had set out to do. "Abigail," he said. "Don't," she said. "Not one word about being sorry." "I lost them. I said don't." She reached in and took his good hand. "Can you walk?" "I can walk," he said, and it took Caleb and one of the stable hands to help him out of the wagon, but he did walk slow and stiff-legged, and breathing through his teeth up the front steps and into the entrance hall of Blackwood Hall. Nathaniel was waiting inside. Samuel stopped when he saw him. The 2 men looked at each other. The brother of the woman who had been wronged, and the son of the man who had done the wronging, and the silence in that hall was the kind that carries 20 years of weight in it. Samuel spoke first. "You're Blackwood," he said. "I am," Nathaniel said. "Your father and your uncle had my father destroyed." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "They did." Samuel's jaw tightened. "And you knew nothing about it?" "Not until 3 days ago." Another silence. Caleb shifted his weight. The stable hand looked at the floor. Samuel looked at Abigail. She met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. He turned back to Nathaniel. "My sister trusts your word on that," he said. "That's the only reason I'm standing in your house." "I understand," Nathaniel said. "I want it understood," Samuel said, "that I am not here as a guest. I am here as a witness. Whatever I carry in my head, every name, every figure, every date I memorized from those documents belongs to my father's case, not to your family's convenience." "Agreed," Nathaniel said. "And if at any point I decide this house is not safe, you leave," Nathaniel said. "No one will stop you." Samuel studied him for another long moment with the eyes of a man who has learned not to take anything at face value. Then he said, "All right." He let Caleb steer him toward the stairs and the room that Mrs. Holt had prepared, and Abigail watched him go, with her heart doing something complicated in her chest, relief and grief and fury, all braided together so tightly she couldn't have separated them if she'd tried. She felt Nathaniel move to stand beside her. "He doesn't believe me," Nathaniel said quietly. "No," she said. "He shouldn't. Not yet." "No," she agreed. "He shouldn't." They stood there side by side in the entrance hall of Blackwood Hall, while the summer light stretched long and amber through the windows, and the sound of Samuel's careful footsteps crossed the floor above their heads. And Abigail thought about her father, about Thomas Whitaker, in his rented room in Richmond, with his single candle and his ruined name. And she thought about the letter in Samuel's head, all those numbers and dates and names that no one had been able to destroy, because they lived in a living person's memory. And she thought about Friday evening, and a dinner with Judge Elias Blackwood. She thought about what it meant to walk into a lion's den, when the lion did not yet know you had already counted his teeth. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." Friday evening, your uncle's dinner. She turned to look at him. "How much does he know about me, about who I am beyond Thomas Whitaker's daughter?" Nathaniel thought about it. "He knows you're capable. He knows you didn't fold when your family fell. He knows you were educated enough to manage your father's accounts in the last years." He paused. "He does not know what you found in this house. He does not know Samuel is here." "Good," she said. "You want him underestimating you. I want him comfortable," she said. "Comfortable men talk. Comfortable men explain themselves. Comfortable men say things at dinner tables they would never say in courtrooms." She looked back toward the stairs. "And I have a very good memory, Mr. Blackwood." Nathaniel looked at her with something in his expression she hadn't seen there before. Not admiration exactly, not respect exactly. Something quieter than either of those things, and perhaps more durable. "So do I," he said, "when I choose to use it." Abigail said nothing. She walked toward the stairs. At the first step, she paused without turning around. "Get some sleep tonight, Mr. Blackwood. Friday is 4 days away, and we have a great deal of work to do before then." She went up, and somewhere above her, her brother alive, injured, stubborn as stone, and twice as hard to move, was settling into a room inside the house of the man whose family had taken everything. Truth, Abigail had always believed, did not die. It waited. It was patient in ways that living people could not afford to be. It sat in ledgers in locked rooms, and in letters in cedar-smelling boxes, and in the mind of a young man who had been beaten on a river road and refused to forget a single number. It waited for the moment when someone finally opened the right door. She had opened it. Now she just had to walk all the way through. Friday came the way trouble always comes, on time, dressed well, and wearing a pleasant expression. Judge Elias Blackwood's house sat 12 miles east of Blackwood Hall, at the end of a lane lined with old oaks that had been there long enough to remember a different country. The house itself was larger than Nathaniel's, built to impress, rather than to inhabit, the kind of house that announced its owner's importance before a single word was spoken. Abigail knew all of this, because Nathaniel had told her on the ride over, his voice, flat and informational, the way a man briefs a soldier rather than escorts a wife. "He will test you," Nathaniel said. "Not obviously. He'll be gracious. He'll be warm. He'll make you feel as though he is delighted to welcome you. And the entire time he will be measuring every word you say." "I know how men like your uncle operate," Abigail said. "My father dealt with 3 of them before the trial was over." Nathaniel glanced at her. "How did your father handle them?" "He was honest," she said. "He believed that honesty was its own protection, that if a man stated the plain truth clearly enough, it would eventually be recognized." And he was wrong," she said. "Honesty without strategy is just another word for vulnerability." She smoothed the front of her dress. "I learned from his mistake." The carriage stopped. Judge Elias Blackwood was 61 years old, silver-haired, and built like a man who had spent his life being listened to. He shook Nathaniel's hand at the door, and then turned to Abigail, with both of his extended, the gesture of an uncle, welcoming family warm and practiced, and entirely without sincerity. "My dear girl," he said, "what a long time coming this is." His hands were cold. She had expected that. "Judge Blackwood," she said. "The pleasure is mine." He kept her hands a moment longer than necessary, his eyes moving over her face with the expert assessment of a man who made his living reading people under oath. She met his gaze and gave him nothing, not hostility, not nervousness, not the particular blankness of someone who is hiding something. Just pleasant, steady attention. He released her hands. Come in, come in. There were 4 other guests at the table, 2 other judges from neighboring counties, a state assemblyman named Porter, and Porter's wife. The men greeted Nathaniel with the easy familiarity of people who had long shared the same rooms, the same clubs, the same unspoken understanding of how things worked. They greeted Abigail with the polite condescension reserved for women who had married up from unfortunate circumstances. She smiled at all of them. She asked Mrs. Porter about her children. She let the assemblyman explain the state legislature to her as though she had never heard of it. And she listened. She listened the way her father had taught her to listen to account books, not for what was said, but for what was arranged. Elias Blackwood watched her listen. She could feel it without looking. A pressure like weather. The first test came before the soup was finished. I must say, the assemblyman said, setting down his spoon with the air of a man introducing a topic he had been asked to introduce. It is a remarkable thing, the Whitaker-Blackwood marriage. History, you might say, correcting itself. The table went slightly still. How do you mean? Nathaniel said. His voice was neutral. Well, Porter smiled. The Whitaker name and the Blackwood name brought together. After all the unpleasantness, it speaks to the generosity of your family, Nathaniel. Taking in a woman of... He paused, searching for the right calibration. Reduced circumstances. Abigail set down her spoon. She looked at Porter with an expression of mild, polite confusion. I'm sorry, she said. I must have misunderstood. Are you suggesting that my husband married me out of charity? Porter blinked. I only meant because I was under the impression. Abigail continued in the same pleasant tone that a marriage between 2 families is a negotiation between equals. Each party brings something to the table. What I brought to my husband's table was my father's business acumen, his knowledge of Virginia land markets. And I'll be honest, Mr. Porter, a rather keen understanding of investment documentation. She picked up her spoon again. I find accounting work suits me. I have been spending a great deal of time in my husband's library. The word library landed in the room like a stone in still water. She watched the ripples reach Elias Blackwood's face. He smiled. How industrious, he said. I am my father's daughter, she said warmly. He always said that a woman who understands numbers will never be at anyone's mercy. Elias Blackwood looked at his nephew. Nathaniel was eating his soup. After the meal, the men withdrew. It was expected. It was customary. It was also, Abigail had calculated, the moment she had been waiting for. Mrs. Porter was a kind woman who wanted to talk about her daughter's upcoming engagement. Abigail listened and responded and appeared entirely absorbed in the conversation, and while she did, she waited. She did not have to wait long. The parlor door opened. A housemaid appeared and said that Judge Blackwood wondered if Mrs. Blackwood might join the gentleman. He had a question about the Virginia land records she had mentioned. Of course he did. Abigail excused herself and followed the housemaid. The study was large and deliberately imposing bookshelves, a fireplace, portraits on the walls. The assemblyman and the other judges had arranged themselves around the room in the casual postures of men at ease. Nathaniel stood near the fireplace. He looked at her when she entered, and his expression told her nothing which she had learned meant he was telling her to be careful. Elias Blackwood sat behind his desk. Sit down, my dear, he said. She sat. Nathaniel tells me you've taken an interest in the estate records, he said. I think that's admirable. A wife who understands her husband's business is an asset. I try to be useful, she said. And have you found the Blackwood records in good order? The question was pleasant. The question was a blade. I've found them thorough, she said. Your brother kept excellent documentation. Edmund was meticulous, Elias said. A quality I always admired in him. He leaned forward slightly. I understand your father was also a man of careful records, before his difficulties. He was, she said. He taught me everything I know about how to read a ledger. A pause. and how to recognize when one has been altered. The room changed temperature. She watched it happen, a microshift in every man's posture, the kind that the body makes before the mind has caught up to why. Elias Blackwood did not move. That was the tell. A man with nothing to fear would have reacted a slight frown, a small "oh" of curiosity. He did not move because he was concentrating on not moving. "Altered," he repeated. "That is a serious allegation." "I made no allegation," she said pleasantly. "I simply said I know how to recognize such a thing. I find it a useful skill given the current climate of land speculation in the region." She folded her hands in her lap. "Don't you find it useful, Judge Blackwood, in your work on the circuit?" He looked at her. She looked back. Nathaniel by the fireplace had gone absolutely still. "Of course," Elias said finally. "Accuracy in documentation is paramount to justice." "I couldn't agree more," she said. "But that's On the ride home, Nathaniel did not speak for the first 3 miles. Then he said, "You told him." "I told him nothing," she said. "I showed him that I know. There is a difference. He will move faster now." "Yes," she said. "Abigail." He said her name the way you say a word when you are worried about it. "My uncle does not respond to being cornered by becoming reasonable. He responds by eliminating the threat." "I know," she said. "Samuel is in that house, which is why," she said, "I need you to do something tomorrow that cannot wait." He turned to look at her in the dark of the carriage. "Tell me." "Write to the federal court clerk in Washington," she said. "I need you to formally request a review of my father's trial record. Under your name. Under the Blackwood name." She met his eyes. "Your uncle controls every circuit court between here and the Virginia border. He does not control the federal level, and a Blackwood requesting the review cannot be dismissed as the grievance of a disgraced family." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "That is a declaration of war against my uncle," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is. He will know it was your idea." "He already knows," she said. "He knew the moment I walked into that dining room. The question was never whether he would figure out what I'm doing. The question is whether we move faster than he does." Nathaniel looked at her for a long time. The carriage rolled through the dark. "You planned this from the beginning," he said. "Not accusatory. More like a man reading the last page of a book and finally understanding the first chapter." "I planned to use what I found," she said. "I did not plan on you." "What does that mean?" She turned to look out the window. "I planned for a hostile husband, for a man I would need to work around. I planned for obstruction and denial and possibly outright opposition." She paused. "I did not plan for a man who sat on his father's study floor and read every letter in the box." The silence between them was different from all the other silences. It was not guarded. It was not wary. It was the silence of 2 people who have stopped performing for each other and have not yet decided what comes after that. "Write the letter," she said. "Tonight if you can." "Tonight," he said. The letter was written and sealed before midnight. Abigail carried it downstairs herself and left it for the Morning Post writer, and when she turned to go back upstairs, she found Nathaniel standing in the hall. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "My uncle came to see me," he said. 3 months before our wedding was arranged. He told me that the Whitaker girl was available, that the family had fallen and the girl had no prospects. He said it would be... He stopped. He pressed his jaw together for a moment. He said it would be a clean resolution, a way to put the Whitaker matter to rest, a Blackwood absorbing what was left of the family, closing the account as it were. Abigail's chest tightened. "He arranged the marriage," she said. "He proposed the arrangement," Nathaniel said. "I agreed to it. Because I believed my father had been in the right and your father had been in the wrong, and I thought..." He exhaled. "I thought it was a reasonable thing to do, a generous thing." He said the word like it tasted bad. "God help me, I thought I was being generous." She absorbed this. She absorbed the particular ugliness of it, not cruelty, not malice, but the careless certainty of a man who has never once questioned the ground beneath his feet. "Your uncle arranged this marriage," she said slowly, "to put the Whitaker matter to rest, to ensure that if any questions arose, the woman most likely to ask them would be inside the family," Nathaniel said, "where the family could manage her." He looked at her with an expression of such flat self-disgust that she almost felt something for him that wasn't calculation. "I was supposed to be his solution, Abigail. He used me the same way my father used yours." The hall was very quiet. "Does he know about Samuel?" she said. "Does he know Samuel is here?" Nathaniel's expression shifted. "I don't know." "We need to know tonight," she said. She was already moving toward the stairs. She woke Samuel herself, hating the necessity of it. He came awake fast, the way men come awake when they've been beaten and left alone on a road, all the slow trust of deep sleep burned away by experience. "What's wrong?" he said. "I need everything you remember," she said. She sat on the edge of the chair beside his bed and put the lamp on the nightstand and pulled out her writing paper. "Every name, every number, every date. Right now, Samuel. I need it all written down tonight." He pushed himself upright against the headboard. "What's happened?" "The man who had you beaten arranged our marriage," she said. "He meant to put us inside this house where he could watch us. I've moved faster than he expected, but that window is closing." She dipped her pen. "Talk to me." Samuel looked at her, at his younger sister, sitting rigid-backed in a chair in the middle of the night in her enemy's house, with a pen in her hand and a look in her eye that reminded him with a force that hit somewhere behind his sternum of their father. "November 1808, he said. "First entry, Edmund Blackwood. $4,300 marked as a capital advance toward the Shenandoah Valley Land Consortium. Recipient listed as," she wrote. He talked. Nathaniel stood in the doorway the entire time. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. He listened to every word Samuel said, and once, when Samuel's voice faltered, not from pain, but from the particular weight of saying his father's name alongside the name of the crime committed against him, Nathaniel moved into the room and poured water from the bedside pitcher and set the glass within Samuel's reach. Samuel looked at it. He looked at Nathaniel. He picked up the glass and kept talking. By 2 in the morning they had 14 pages. Every transaction, every name, every date Samuel had memorized from the original documents, and he had memorized them the way a man memorizes something he knows will be taken from him, every digit stamped into his mind, like type into paper. Abigail held the pages and counted them. "This is enough," she said. "Combined with the letters from the East Room, this is enough." "For a federal review," Nathaniel said. "Yes, but a review takes time. Months possibly. And my uncle will not wait months if he knows we're—" A sound from downstairs. All three of them heard it. Not a loud sound, not a dramatic one. The sound of a door that had been opened carefully by someone who did not want to be heard opening it. Nathaniel moved before either of them spoke. He was out of the doorway and into the hall and down the top of the staircase in seconds, and Abigail was behind him with the lamp, and Samuel was swinging his legs over the side of the bed, with his splinted arm against his chest and his face set hard. At the bottom of the stairs stood Mrs. Holt, fully dressed with her coat on and a satchel in her hand. She stopped when she saw them. Abigail held the lamp higher. Mrs. Holt's face was the face of a woman who has been caught between two choices and has not yet fully committed to either one. "Mrs. Holt," Nathaniel said. His voice was quiet and entirely without warmth. "It is 2 in the morning." The housekeeper said nothing. "Where are you going?" Nathaniel said. Still nothing. Abigail came down 2 more steps. She looked at the woman, at the coat, the satchel, the hour, the particular quality of her silence. "Someone sent for you," Abigail said. Not a question. Mrs. Holt's eyes moved to her. In them was something that looked like shame, but also looked around the edges like fear. "Who sent for you?" Abigail said. "Was it my husband's uncle?" The housekeeper's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Holt," Abigail said. You kept those boxes for 15 years because you could not bring yourself to burn them. That was not the act of a woman who serves a corrupt man with a full heart. Tell me who sent for you." A long moment. Then, "His man came this afternoon," Mrs. Holt said. "While you were at dinner, he said the judge needed to know if there had been any unusual activity in the house. Any papers moved. She stopped. "Any visitors." "And you told him," Nathaniel said. "I told him nothing unusual had occurred," she said. Her voice had steadied. "Because I was in the kitchen all afternoon and I saw nothing unusual." She looked at Abigail. "I did not mention Mr. Whitaker's arrival." The hall was absolutely silent. "But he sent for you tonight," Abigail said. "He sent a second man, with a note." She opened the satchel and pulled out a folded paper. "He says he knows a guest has arrived. He says he needs me to come to his house immediately to provide an account of what has been happening in this household." Nathaniel took the note. He read it. His face went very still in the way she had come to understand meant he was making a decision. "You're not going," he said. Mrs. Holt blinked. "Sir." "You're not going to my uncle's house tonight, or any night until this is resolved," he said. "He has no authority over the employees of this household. He has no authority over this house. He is a circuit judge, not my father, and he does not give orders here." He handed the note back to her. "Go back to bed, Mrs. Holt." She stood very still. "You kept those boxes," he said, and his voice shifted, less command, more something private and difficult. "For 15 years. I didn't know that. I should have asked more questions about a great many things and I didn't. But I'm asking now." He paused. "I need to know, is there anything else in this house that you kept? Anything else you were told to destroy and couldn't?" Mrs. Holt looked at him for a long moment. Then she set the satchel down. She said, "There is a locked case in the cellar, behind the wine racks on the left wall. I have had the key on my ring for 19 years, and I was told it was the records of a closed business account that no longer required attention." Nathaniel looked at Abigail. Abigail looked at Mrs. Holt. "Show me," she said. The case was iron small enough to carry with one arm, sealed with a lock that the key opened with the ease of something well maintained. Someone had oiled that lock within the past year. Someone had wanted to know it still worked. Inside were 3 things. The first was a signed agreement between Edmund Blackwood and Thomas Whitaker from 1807, the original unaltered version showing Whitaker's participation as that of an auditor, brought in to assess the scheme's legitimacy. Not an investor, not a conspirator, an auditor. The second was a letter from Judge Elias Blackwood to his brother Edmund dated 6 months before the trial, instructing him in terms that left no interpretation possible to ensure that Whitaker's auditing report never reached the court. The third was a copy of Thomas Whitaker's original objection letter, the letter he had written to Edmund Blackwood formally withdrawing from any association with the investment scheme, and stating clearly that he believed the documentation was fraudulent. It had been dated 4 months before the fraud collapsed. 4 months before Edmund Blackwood had stood in a courtroom and sworn that Thomas Whitaker was the architect of the entire scheme. Abigail held the papers in both hands. She had been so careful. She had been so controlled. 4 years of controlled, careful strategic grief, not crying at funerals, not trembling at altars, not flinching at wedding threats. 4 years of keeping the fury banked low, so it burned long instead of fast. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the papers and breathed through it. From behind her, she heard Samuel say, "Abigail." "I'm fine," she said. "You don't have to be fine right now," he said. She turned around. Her brother was standing in the cellar doorway, bad arm against his chest, the lamplight catching the healing scar along his hairline, and his face had the expression it had worn at their father's burial. Not grief exactly, but the exhausted recognition of a loss that had been coming for too long. Behind him, Nathaniel stood in the shadow of the staircase. She looked at the papers in her hands. She looked at the iron case. She thought about her father with his careful handwriting and his methodical ledgers and his absolute fatal trust that plainly spoken truth would protect a good man. She thought about the room in Richmond, the single candle. He knew, she said. Her voice was steady. Before the trial, he knew they were going to bury him. He sent his objection letter, he laid out the entire fraud in plain language, and they kept a copy of it locked in a box in their own cellar. As insurance, Nathaniel said quietly, in case someone internal ever turned on them. Proof that Whitaker had been warned off, that he wasn't ignorant, that his involvement could be made to look willful. They covered every angle, she said. Yes, she looked at Nathaniel. And then your uncle arranged my marriage to your family, to close the account. Nathaniel held her gaze. He did not look away. Yes. She gathered the papers. All 3 documents, all 3 pieces of a crime that had been sitting in an iron case in a wine cellar for 15 years, while her father's name rotted and her father died, and Samuel chased paper trails, and she planned a marriage like a siege. These go to Washington, she said. With your letter, not by post, by hand. Someone we trust who rides tonight. Nathaniel said, I'll go myself. She looked at him. He is my uncle, Nathaniel said. The request carries more weight if I deliver it in person. If I stand in front of the federal clerk and put the Blackwood name on the request and say that I am a Blackwood asking for the review of a case in which my own family committed perjury. He stopped. They cannot ignore it, and my uncle cannot reach me in Washington. He will know you've gone, she said. The moment you leave, you'll be here, Nathaniel said. With Samuel, with Mrs. Holt. And you will not be alone. He walked across the cellar and took the papers from her hands carefully, the way you take something from someone who has been holding it a very long time. He looked down at them, at Thomas Whitaker's handwriting, at the objection letter dated 4 months before the trial. Something moved across his face that she had never seen on it before, and she thought it might be the specific expression of a man confronting the precise moment he understands what his inheritance actually cost. I'm sorry, he said. He said it to the papers. He said it to the handwriting of a dead man who could not hear it. Then he looked at her. I will be back in 4 days, he said. Keep the doors locked. Don't answer any message from my uncle. If anyone comes to this house claiming to act on his authority, send word to the county magistrate, not the circuit court, the county magistrate who does not answer to Elias Blackwood. He held the papers against his chest. Can you do that? I've been doing harder things than that since I was 19 years old, she said. He looked at her one more moment. Then he turned and went up the stairs, and she heard him call for Caleb, heard the sound of boots and a horse and the front door of Blackwood Hall opening into the hot summer dark. Samuel came to stand beside her. They stood there together in the cellar of the house that had held their father's ruin in an iron box for 15 years. Do you trust him? Samuel asked. Abigail thought about a man sitting on his father's study floor reading every letter in a box. She thought about a glass of water set within reach without a word. She thought about, I will go myself, said without hesitation. I'm starting to, she said. It was the most dangerous thing she had admitted in 4 years. Nathaniel had been gone less than 6 hours when Judge Elias Blackwood came to Blackwood Hall. He did not send a rider ahead. He did not announce himself. He arrived mid-morning with 2 men behind him and the particular confidence of someone who has never once been turned away from a door he wanted open. Abigail heard the horses from the upstairs landing. She had not slept. She had spent the remaining hours before dawn organizing the copies she had made of Samuel's testimony written in her hand, witnessed by Mrs. Holt, into a separate packet that she had sewn into the lining of her traveling trunk. The originals had gone with Nathaniel. But Abigail Whitaker had not survived 4 years on a single copy of anything. She came downstairs before the knock landed on the door. She opened it herself. Elias Blackwood stood on the front steps in his riding coat, silver-haired and unhurried, with the smile of a man paying a social call. Behind him, his 2 men waited at the foot of the steps with the blank-faced patience of people paid to stand quietly and be large. My dear Abigail, he said. I hope I haven't called too early. I was nearby and thought I'd look in on my nephew's household. Nathaniel is not at home, she said. She kept the door open, but she did not step back to admit him. Something shifted behind his eyes, just a flicker quickly smoothed. "Not at home. I hope nothing has taken him away on urgent business." "He had matters to attend to," she said. "He will be back in a few days. May I give him a message?" Elias looked at her pleasantly. "I wonder if I might come in all the same. It's a warm morning, and I've ridden some distance." "Of course," she said. She stepped back. She brought him to the front parlor and rang for tea, and sat across from him with her hands in her lap, and her spine straight, and her face composed into the expression of a polite young wife receiving a family guest. He looked around the room. Not casually. Systematically. "You've settled in well," he said. "Blackwood Hall is a welcoming house," she said. "I've enjoyed becoming familiar with it." "Yes," he said. "I heard you've been exploring." He accepted the cup Mrs. Holt brought and stirred it slowly. "Edmund's study, I understand. And the library." "A new household should know itself," she said. "I find record-keeping comforting. My father taught me that." "Your father," Elias said with the tone of a man picking up a piece of crockery to examine its weight. "Thomas. Yes, a careful man. It was a great shame what happened to him." "It was," she said. "Fraud is an ugly business," he said. "It destroys not just the guilty, but everyone around them, families, reputations, futures." He looked at her directly. "I always regretted that the law could not be kinder to the innocent parties in such cases." "The law is what men make it," she said. "No kinder and no crueler." He set his cup down. "Where is your brother?" There it was. She had expected it before this. She had been waiting for it since he walked through the door. "Samuel is recovering from injuries he sustained on the road," she said. "He is being looked after." "Here. He is being looked after," she said again. The judge looked at her with an expression that had stopped pretending to be avuncular. It was the face she realized that he wore in courtrooms, attentive, measuring certain of its own authority. "Abigail," he said, "I am going to speak to you plainly, because I think you are a plain-speaking woman, and you will appreciate it more than pleasantries." "I always appreciate plain speech," she said. "Whatever you believe you have found in this house," he said, "it is not what you think it is. Old records are incomplete by nature. Partial documentation creates false impressions. My brother was a meticulous man, but even meticulous men keep records that, removed from context, can be made to appear—" He paused. "Irregular." "I'm sure that's true," she said. "I want to help you," he said. "I want to help your brother. Your father's case was unfortunate, and I understand that your family has carried the weight of it for years. There may be ways to address that quietly, privately, without dragging the matter through federal courts, which would be unpleasant for everyone and ultimately unproductive." Abigail looked at him. He was offering her money. He was offering it wrapped in sympathy and good intentions and the language of familial concern. But he was offering her money and silence, and the burial of her father's name under a slightly more comfortable gravestone. She kept her voice perfectly even. "That is very generous of you, Judge Blackwood." "I only want what is best for this family," he said. "Nathaniel's family now includes you, and I would hate to see a young woman's future complicated by decisions made in grief." "Grief is clarifying," she said, "not complicating. I have found that losing someone teaches you exactly what matters." He looked at her steadily. "And what matters to you, my dear—" "The truth," she said. "In my experience, it is the only thing that doesn't deteriorate with age." The silence between them stretched long and tight as a bowstring. Then Elias Blackwood stood. He set his cup on the table with a precision that communicated something that was not departure but warning. "Tell Nathaniel I called," he said. "And do tell your brother that travel is unwise when a man is still healing. Roads can be dangerous." He meant it as a threat. She heard it as one. She let it land without flinching. "I'll pass that along," she said. She walked him to the door and stood on the steps and watched his carriage until it disappeared down the drive. Then she turned and found Mrs. Holt standing directly behind her. "Lock every door," Abigail said. Front back side passages, every window on the ground floor, and send someone to town the county magistrate's office. Tell them the new Mrs. Blackwood has requested that a deputy be stationed near this property for the next several days. Tell them her husband authorized the request before he left. She paused. Tell them there has been a threat against a guest of this household. Mrs. Holt said, "Yes, ma'am," and moved. Samuel came downstairs an hour later, and by the look on his face he had heard enough. "He was here," he said. "He was." "Did he threaten you?" "He was too careful for that," she said. "He offered me a quiet settlement, addressed me like a woman who could be managed with money and soft words." She sat down across from him. "He underestimates me. That is still useful." "For how long?" Samuel said. "Nathaniel has been gone 6 hours, and he's already at the door. When he figures out where Nathaniel went, he may already know," she said. "He's not a fool." "Then we have days, Abigail, not weeks." "I know that. The federal clerk in Washington takes time," she said. "I know that too." She looked at her brother. "But we don't need the federal review to move first. We need it to be irrefutable when it does move. In the meantime, there is something else." Samuel waited. "The assemblyman," she said. "Porter. He was at that dinner table. He heard everything I said about altered records, and he heard your uncle's response, and he is a state-level official who has no particular loyalty to Elias Blackwood except proximity and habit." She folded her hands on the table. "A letter. From me as Nathaniel's wife. Requesting a private meeting. Telling him only that new documentation has come to light regarding the Whitaker case, and that the Blackwood family is committed to correcting an injustice." Samuel stared at her. "You'd go to a state assemblyman before the federal review comes back." "I'd go to every lever I can reach," she said. "Your uncle has controlled this region for 20 years by being the only person willing to pull levers. I'm done waiting for permission to use the same machinery." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Papa would have been terrified of what you've become." "Papa," she said, "would have been terrified of what they turned me into. There's a difference." Samuel looked at her at his sister across the table. This woman who had walked into enemy territory, wearing a wedding dress and a letter sewn into her hem, and something in his face broke open in a way it hadn't since they were children. "I should have been faster," he said. "The documents. Stop. If I hadn't lost them." "Samuel!" Her voice was sharp enough to cut the sentence in half. "You carried those papers across 3 counties alone with men on your trail. You got beaten within a mile of the man who ordered it, and you still sent Caleb to find me, and you still remembered every number." She held his gaze. "You did not fail Papa. You kept the truth alive in the only place no one could take it from you, your own head." His jaw worked. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Save the apology for when this is over, and we've got nothing left to fight about." He looked at the table. Then he nodded. "Write the letter to Porter," he said. "I'll help you draft it." The letter went out by midday. By late afternoon, something else arrived. A rider came to the gate, not one of Elias Blackwood's men, not anyone Abigail recognized. A young man in a dust-covered coat who said his name was Henshaw, and that he had a message from a Mr. Alcott in Washington. Abigail had never heard the name Alcott. She almost turned him away. Then Henshaw said, "Mr. Blackwood said to tell you the name, ma'am. He said you'd know it meant the letter was received." She brought him inside. Alcott, Henshaw explained, was a federal records clerk, a real one, not an official, but a man who worked in the office and who had processed Nathaniel's request the previous evening. The request had been logged. The documents had been received and examined by a senior clerk who had, according to Henshaw, gone very quiet for a long time while reading them. "Mr. Blackwood said to tell you," Henshaw continued, reaching into his coat, "that the process has begun, and he sent this." He held out a letter. Abigail's name on the outside in Nathaniel's hand. She opened it. It was short. 3 sentences. "The documents are in the right hands. I have spoken to 2 people here who remember your father's name and are not happy about how it ended. Come to Washington if you can bring Samuel if he can travel. We are closer than I thought. She read it twice. Then she looked at Henshaw. How long did it take you to ride here? 14 hours, ma'am. I left last night. Can you ride back tonight? He hesitated. With a few hours' rest. Take what you need, she said. There will be a reply waiting. She went directly to the writing desk. The reply she wrote to Nathaniel was longer than his letter, but still deliberately spare. She could not know whose hands it might pass through on the road. She told him to find out everything the Washington clerks knew about Thomas Whitaker's original audit report, not the version entered into the trial record, but the original if it existed anywhere in federal archives. She told him that Elias Blackwood had come to the house. She told him Samuel was well and safe. She told him the county magistrate had been notified. She did not tell him she was afraid. She was. A thin, cold fear that lived in her stomach and did not announce itself but was always there, the fear of a person who has set something irreversible in motion and must now live inside the consequences of their own courage. She sealed the letter and brought it to Henshaw and told Mrs. Holt to feed him and give him a cot in the servants' quarters. Then she went upstairs and stood at the window for a long time. She thought about what her father had said once when she was 15, and had made a business error in the accounts, and had come to him in misery expecting disappointment. A mistake is only a mistake if you stop there, he had said. Every error is also information. The question is whether you use it. She had used everything, every piece of information. Every mistake, every grief, every year of waiting. Every document she had memorized, every conversation she had filed away. She had used all of it, and she was still using it, and she was terrified that it would not be enough. She pressed her forehead against the window glass. She stayed there until the fear settled back into the place where she kept it banked and contained, and then she straightened and turned back to the room. Porter's reply came the following morning. He would meet with her 2 days hence, at a location of her choosing, private and away from the county courthouse. He wrote that he had thought a great deal about the dinner conversation, and that he had, in his own words, a professional interest in ensuring that the circuit court's records reflected the highest standards of accuracy. It was the most carefully worded yes she had ever received. She showed it to Samuel. He's nervous, Samuel said. He's practical, she said. He has an election next year. His name on the right side of a federal review is worth more to him than his name on the wrong side of a scandal. She folded the letter. Let him be practical. It gets us where we need to go. And if Elias gets to him first, then we'll know whose man Porter actually is, she said, and we'll move without him. Samuel looked at her with the expression he had been wearing more and more often over the past few days, part admiration, part worry, part something that was almost grief, though she couldn't identify for what. When did you become this person? He said. 4 years ago, she said, in a rented room in Richmond, the night Papa died. He had no answer for that. Neither did she. On the third day, Elias Blackwood made his second move. A letter arrived addressed to Samuel Whitaker, care of Blackwood Hall. Abigail brought it upstairs herself and watched her brother's face as he read it. His expression went through 3 changes in quick succession: confusion, understanding, and then a hard, cold anger that looked nothing like his usual face and exactly like hers. He held the letter out. She read it. Elias Blackwood wrote to Samuel directly. Brother to alleged victim, with the smooth confidence of a man who has dismissed the woman from the equation entirely. He acknowledged that certain old business arrangements had perhaps caused collateral damage to the Whitaker family. He used the phrase collateral damage without apparent awareness of what it revealed about how he understood the destruction of a man's life. He offered Samuel a sum, a substantial sum, named specifically in exchange for a signed statement that Samuel Whitaker had no knowledge of any fraud perpetrated by any member of the Blackwood family and no intention of pursuing legal or federal redress. He offered it as settlement. He meant it as a purchase. At the bottom, he had added a handwritten line beneath his formal signature. "The past is best left in the past. For your sister's sake, if not your own." Samuel put the letter down on the bed covers. "He doesn't know about Washington," he said. "He doesn't know how far we've already gotten," she agreed. "He thinks he can still buy this. He has bought everything else that threatened him," she said. "He has no reason to think this is different." Samuel looked at her. "It is different." "Yes," she said. "It is. Because you won't stop. Because there is nothing left to offer me," she said simply. "He could offer me 10 times that sum, and it would not give me back what his family took. Money does not restore a name. It does not undo a verdict. It does not put my father back in his house in Virginia with his ledgers and his careful handwriting." She picked up the letter. "It buys silence. I am not interested in silence." Samuel breathed in slowly. "Abigail, if we push this all the way, Federal Review Public Record, everything into the open, it will be ugly. It will be in every newspaper from here to Boston. Your name will be in print alongside the trial record. People will read it, and half of them will still believe what they were told," she said. "Yes, I know that." She met his eyes. "But the court record will say something different, and court records outlast gossip by 100 years. He was quiet. "This isn't about what people say at dinner tables," she said. "This is about what the law says, about what the official record of this country says about Thomas Whitaker." She set the letter down. "He deserves that. He deserves to have the truth written in the same place the lie was written." Samuel pressed his good hand over his face. When he lowered it, his eyes were bright, and he was not going to acknowledge that. "Write back to him," Samuel said. "To Elias. Tell him." "We don't write back to him," she said. "We give him nothing. Not acknowledgement, not refusal, not another word. Every letter he sends us is evidence that he's worried. We let him be worried, and we keep moving." Samuel picked up the letter and held it for a moment. "Evidence," he said. "Everything he sends us goes into the packet," she said. "With the rest." He handed it back to her. She added it to the case. Nathaniel came back on the 4th day. He rode in at dusk, covered in road dust, and Abigail heard his horse and was at the front door before he had dismounted. She had not realized until that exact moment how much of her attention had been occupied quietly and constantly by the question of whether he would come back at all. He came through the door and stopped when he saw her standing in the hallway. He looked exhausted. He also looked like a man who had done something difficult and had not yet fully processed the weight of having done it. "You're all right," he said. It was both a question and a statement. "We're all right," she said. "Your uncle came." "I know. Porter sent word to me in Washington." He handed his coat to the housemaid without looking at her. He went to Porter too, tried to convince him to distance himself from any involvement. "Porter is still meeting with me," she said. "I know that too." He looked at her. Porter said something interesting. He said the woman Blackwood married appeared to be running a more effective legal strategy than most attorneys he'd worked with, and that he found it refreshing. Despite everything, something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile. Close. "He's a practical man," she said. "He's about to be a very carefully practical man," Nathaniel said, "because the federal clerk in Washington found something." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a folded document. Thomas Whitaker's original audit report, filed with the Federal Land Office in 1808 under a procedural requirement that my uncle apparently forgot existed, or didn't expect anyone to look for. Abigail's hand came out and then stopped. She looked at the document in his hand. "The original," she said. "Complete, unaltered, filed under federal jurisdiction, which means it was never under my uncle's control." He held it out. "Your father's name, his signature, his assessment of the scheme. Everything your brother described from memory in your father's own hand, dated 4 months before the fraud collapsed." She took it. She unfolded it. Thomas Whitaker's handwriting was exactly as she remembered it. Precise, upright, each letter fully formed the handwriting of a man who believed that clarity on paper reflected clarity of mind. She read the first paragraph. She read the notation at the bottom where her father had formally declared the investment scheme to carry significant risk of fraudulent misrepresentation, and had recommended that all investors be formally notified and the consortium dissolved. She read her father's name at the bottom. Thomas A. Whitaker, Auditor, November 14, 1808. 4 months before the scheme collapsed. 4 months before he was made to carry it. She stood very still for a long moment with the document in both hands. Then she folded it back along its original creases and held it against her chest. Nathaniel watched her. He did not speak. Samuel appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked down at his sister standing in the hallway with the document pressed against her chest and something in her face that she was not trying to hide for once, and he came down the stairs without rushing and sat on the bottom step and leaned his good shoulder against the newel post and said nothing at all. The three of them stayed in the hall. Outside, summer pressed its full heat against the house. Somewhere a horse shifted. A door closed somewhere in the servants' wing. The oil lamps flickered. It was Nathaniel who finally broke the silence. "There is one more thing," he said. His voice was careful. "The senior clerk in Washington. After he reviewed everything, your father's audit report, the letters from the East Room, Samuel's testimony, the iron case documents, he told me that the evidence is sufficient not just for a review." He paused. "It is sufficient for a formal petition to vacate the original conviction." Samuel's head came up. Abigail lowered the document from her chest. "Vacate," she said. "Wipe it from the record," Nathaniel said. "Not just reviewed, overturned. Your father's name restored to its original standing. The conviction struck as fraudulently obtained." The word hung in the air of the hallway. Vacate. As though the thing had never happened. As though Thomas Whitaker had walked out of that courtroom in 1811 without a stain. As though the years that followed had not occurred. As though the rented room in Richmond had been merely a rented room, and not the last room, of a man who had been slowly broken by a verdict he did not deserve. It could not undo any of that. Abigail knew it could not undo any of that. But the record, the official permanent legal record of this country, would say something true about her father. "How long?" she said. "The petition takes time," he said. "Months. But the clerk said he's never seen a case this clean. Every piece of evidence is independently corroborated. Your father's own document filed under federal jurisdiction. Letters in the perpetrator's own hands. A witness who memorized the original proof." He looked at Samuel. He said, "Your testimony is the spine of the whole thing." Samuel looked at his splinted arm, then at the stairs, then at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man absorbing something that is larger than any single feeling can contain. "And your uncle," Abigail said. "A separate matter," Nathaniel said. "What happens to him legally is a separate process." But the clerk made clear that a man who committed perjury on a circuit court bench is a matter of serious federal interest. He met her eyes. "He will not survive this professionally. Whether he survives it legally depends on how far the petition process goes." "He came here," she said. "He threatened my brother on the road. He offered Samuel money for silence." "I know," he said. "I know all of it. I have the letter." "Good." "Nathaniel." She said his name the way she had heard him say hers, like a word she wasn't entirely sure the weight of yet. "This was your family, your father, your uncle, the name you were raised inside." He looked at her steadily. "Yes." "And you carried those documents to Washington yourself?" "Yes." "Why?" she said. "You could have handed them to a lawyer. You could have filed the request by post. You could have put your name on a document from a distance and kept your hands cleaner than this." He thought about it. Not quickly, the way he thought about everything that mattered, slowly and without looking away. "Because my father stood in a courtroom," he said at last, "and looked Thomas Whitaker in the face and swore to God and law that a good man was a criminal. And someone needed to stand in a room and look the truth in the face and say that the lie is over." He held her gaze. "I am the only Blackwood left who can do that. So I did it." The hallway was very quiet. Samuel stood up from the stairs. He crossed to Nathaniel and he stood in front of the man and looked at him for a long moment with the eyes of someone who has not yet fully decided and knows the decision matters. Then he put his good hand out. Nathaniel shook it. Neither of them said anything. Abigail watched the two of them. Her brother and her husband standing in the entrance hall of a house built on a lie, shaking hands over the wreckage of it, and she thought that her father would not have understood this moment. Thomas Whitaker had been too honest, too good, too certain that honesty was its own protection. He had been wrong about that, but he had been right about everything else, and now the law was going to say so. The petition took 4 months. 4 months of waiting that felt nothing like waiting, because waiting implies stillness, and there was nothing still about those months at Blackwood Hall. There were letters to draft and legal consultations to coordinate, and a county magistrate who visited twice to take formal statements. There was Samuel's slow recovery measured in the gradual return of his handwriting from shaky to steady. In the morning, he woke up and came downstairs without anyone hearing him wince on the stairs. There was Porter, the assemblyman who met with Abigail twice and said very little, but listened with the focused attention of a man counting what the truth might be worth to him, and eventually concluded that it was worth more than its opposite. And there was Nathaniel. He did not become a different man overnight. She would not have trusted that. What happened was slower, and therefore more real, a daily renegotiation of the terms of the house of the marriage of two people who had entered a room together under entirely false pretenses, and were now piece by piece figuring out what they actually were to each other. He stopped giving orders in the way he had always given them, not because he was told to, but because he seemed to have lost his certainty that he was automatically right, and without that certainty, commands became conversations. She stopped moving around him like a problem to be solved. She had spent so long thinking of him as an obstacle, then a tool, then a reluctant ally. She had not planned for the morning. She looked across the breakfast table and understood that she was simply looking at a man she had come to know. It was uncomfortable. It was also, she admitted to no one, something close to relief. The formal notice came on a Tuesday in October. Mrs. Holt brought it to Abigail in the library, a sealed document bearing the federal court's mark addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Nathaniel Blackwood. Abigail set down her pen. She looked at the document for a full 10 seconds before she picked it up. She broke the seal. She read the first paragraph. Then she read it again. Then she set it flat on the desk and pressed both hands over it and breathed. In the matter of the Commonwealth of Maryland versus Thomas A. Whitaker case, number 1, 811-CR-047. The petition for vacatur, having been reviewed by this court and found to be supported by substantial and independently corroborated evidence of fraudulent conduct by officers of the court and witnesses in the original proceeding, the original conviction is hereby vacated in full. The record of Thomas A. Whitaker is to be expunged of said conviction and restored to good standing, effective the date of this notice. She read it a third time. She read her father's name in the formal language of the law, not the disgraced merchant or the convicted fraudster, but Thomas A. Whitaker restored to good standing, as though the law were putting a hand on his shoulder and saying quietly, "We were wrong, and here is the record corrected." She stood up. She walked to the foot of the stairs. "Samuel," she called. He appeared at the top landing in his shirt sleeves, arm no longer splinted. "What is it?" She held up the document. He came down the stairs so fast she was surprised he didn't miss a step. He took the paper from her hands and read it standing in the hallway with the October light coming through the windows, and his jaw set and his eyes moving fast across the lines. She watched him read it. She watched him reach the end. She watched him read it again. He did not cry. Neither did she. They stood in the hall together, and the silence between them was the specific silence of two people who have carried something so heavy for so long that when it is finally set down, the body doesn't immediately know what to do with its own hands. "Papa," Samuel said. Just that word, just the name. "I know," she said. He folded the document carefully along its creases and handed it back. "Where's Nathaniel?" he asked. Eastfield, she said. He's been out since morning. Go get him, Samuel said. He should know. She looked at her brother. Go, he said. And he almost smiled. She found Nathaniel at the fence line of the east field, talking with two of the tenant farmers about the autumn yield, standing with one boot on the lower rail and his hat pushed back on his head in the manner of a man who has gradually stopped performing the role of landowner and started actually being one. He saw her coming across the field, and something in his posture changed, a kind of alertness tuned specifically to her that she had noticed developing over the past months and had not commented on. He excused himself from the farmers and met her halfway. She handed him the document without speaking. He read it. She watched his face move through the same sequence hers had, careful reading, rereading, and then a stillness that was not blankness, but absorption, a man taking a thing fully into himself before responding to it. He lowered the paper. It's done, he said. The conviction is vacated, she said. His name is restored. Nathaniel looked at the document in his hands for another moment. Then he folded it slowly and held it at his side. Your father was an honest man, he said. He deserved better than what this state gave him. Yes, she said. He did. I'm sorry that my family was the instrument of it. She had heard various versions of this apology from him over the past months, carefully worded, never excessive, always stopping short of the kind of performance that would have made her distrust it. This one landed differently because of how simply he said it. No ceremony, no self-flagellation, just the plain statement of a man acknowledging a debt. The debt isn't mine to forgive, she said. It was his. I know, he said, but you're the one still standing. The field around them was quiet. The October air had the particular quality of a summer finally releasing its grip, still warm enough in the sun, with the first real edge of cold underneath it. There is something I need to tell you, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. My uncle's position on the circuit was formally reviewed last month, he said. I received word from the federal clerk. Based on the evidence presented in the petition, specifically the letter in his own hand, instructing my father to suppress your father's audit report, he has been removed from the bench pending a formal investigation. Abigail went very still. Removed. The investigation will take time, he said. Whether it results in criminal charges depends on factors I cannot control. But he does not sit on that bench any longer. He does not have the authority he has had for 20 years. He paused. He cannot harm anyone with it. She absorbed this. For 3 years, she had held the image of Elias Blackwood in her mind, the way you hold a thorn, carefully aware of exactly where the point was managing the pressure. The man who had built the architecture of her father's ruin. The man who had orchestrated her marriage as a lid on a truth he needed kept buried. The man who had sat across a dinner table from her with cold hands and warm words, and believed she was the kind of woman who could be settled with a quiet offer. Removed from the bench. It was not justice in full. She understood that. The men who had destroyed her father walked free for 15 years, and one of them died in his own bed with his name intact. That could not be undone. Justice was not a lever you pulled and watched the scales even out perfectly. It was slower and more imperfect, and sometimes it only arrived in time to say to the dead, you were right. But Elias Blackwood no longer wore that robe. He no longer sat in that chair. He no longer had the authority to make truth disappear on command. That was something. That was, in fact, a great deal. Thank you, she said, for going to Washington, for going yourself. You would have gone without me, he said. If I hadn't moved, you would have found another way. I would have, she said, but it would have taken longer, and it would not have carried the same weight. Because of the name, he said. Not bitterly, just accurately. Because a Blackwood asking the federal court to correct what the Blackwood family did is not the same as a Whitaker asking, she said. The world is not just, but it can occasionally be navigated. He looked at her with that expression she had no name for, the one that was not admiration, and not love exactly, but something that preceded both of those things, something foundational that they might become. You've been navigating it since the day I met you, he said. Since before that, she said. That evening, Abigail brought Samuel the letter she had carried beneath her wedding dress. Not the copy. The original still folded along the same creases, the paper soft from months of being pressed against her, the ink slightly blurred where it had once been damp. She had transferred it from dress to dress, from one garment's lining to the next, without ever quite being ready to let it become something she only kept in a drawer. She sat with Samuel at the library table and put the letter between them. "You should have this back," she said. He looked at it. He didn't touch it immediately. "You kept it." "I kept it through everything," she said. "Through the wedding and the first night in this house, and the dinner with your uncle and the cellar and all of it." She pushed it slightly toward him. "You wrote it when you still believed you were going to make it in time, before anything went wrong." He unfolded it. He read his own words back to himself, the words he had written in a boarding house in Fredericksburg, with the documents in his satchel and his horse ready, and 3 days before 2 men stopped him on a river road. "Abigail, I have everything, every piece. Papa was right about all of it, and I can prove it now. Don't let them start without me. I'm coming." He set it down. He smoothed it flat on the table with his good hand. "I didn't make it in time," he said. "You made it," she said. "Time is not the only measure." He looked up. "You kept it alive," she said. "In your head, in your memory. Every number, every date, every name, you carried it through everything they did to you, and you didn't lose a single digit." She held his gaze. "That was not a failure, Samuel. That was the whole fight." He was quiet for a long moment. "He never got to see it," he said. "Papa." "No," she said. "He didn't. Does it matter?" His voice cracked on the last word, not from weakness, but from the specific fracture of a question a person has been afraid to ask. "Does it matter that the record is corrected if he's not here to read it?" She did not answer quickly. She owed him a real answer, not a consoling one. "I think it matters," she said finally, "because the record is what remains. People die. Memory fades. But what is written in the law, what is officially, permanently, irreversibly written, that stays." She looked at her brother. 100 years from now, if anyone pulls Thomas Whitaker's file, they will find a man of good standing. They will find an auditor who identified a fraud and reported it honestly. They will find someone who was wronged and then corrected. She paused. He deserves to exist in the record as who he actually was, not who they made him. Samuel pressed his fist against his mouth. He held it there for a moment. Then he lowered his hand and said, "All right," in the voice of a man making peace with something he has been fighting for a long time. "All right," he said again. Nathaniel found her in the library an hour later after Samuel had gone upstairs. He came in and sat in the chair across the desk without asking, and looked at her in the lamplight, in the way he had developed of looking at her direct, without social armor, in a manner that she had initially found unsettling, and had gradually come to regard as one of the better things about him. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "This marriage," he said. "When you planned it, when you decided to come here, did you think about after? What happened after the goal was accomplished?" She considered the question honestly. "No," she said. "I didn't think past the goal. And now," she looked at him. "Now I am in a house," she said slowly, "with a man I didn't expect to respect, in a situation I didn't plan for, and I'm finding that the things I didn't plan for are the ones I don't know how to walk away from." He held her gaze. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I've spent 4 years planning everything. I find I'm not very practiced at not planning." Something shifted in his face, quieter than a smile, more durable. "Then don't plan," he said. "Just tell me what's true." She was quiet for a moment. "What's true," she said carefully, "is that you are not who I thought you were when I walked into that church. What's true is that I don't regret being here, and I am not certain I would have said that 4 months ago. She looked at the desk at the surface that had held ledgers and letters and 14 pages of her brother's testimony, and now held nothing but lamplight. What's true is that I don't know what kind of marriage this is yet, but I'm not leaving. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. I told you at the altar, he said, that you would learn to kneel before winter. You did, she said. That was the worst thing I've ever said to a person, he said. Flat, no decoration. The statement of a man who has audited himself and found the entry and will not erase it. I said it because it was what my father would have said, because I had been taught that power was demonstrated by diminishing people who had less of it. He held her gaze. I don't believe that anymore. What do you believe? She said. I believe, he said, that the courage it took to walk into this house the way you walked into it, knowing what you knew, planning what you planned, carrying what you carried, is worth more than anything my father built. He paused. I believe my name means more now than it did before I tried to destroy it. She looked at him. He looked back. I'm not asking you to forgive my family, he said. I'm not asking you to forget what brought you here. I'm only asking... He stopped. Then quietly, stay. Not because the law named you my wife. Stay because you want to. It was the most unguarded thing she had ever heard him say. She let it sit in the air between them for a moment. Then she said, I just told you I'm not leaving Nathaniel. That's not the same as staying, he said. She understood the distinction. It was the difference between endurance and choice, between tolerance and presence, between a woman who remains because she has nowhere else to go, and a woman who remains because she has made a decision. Then I'm staying, she said, because I choose to. He nodded once. He did not make a spectacle of it. He picked up the book on the corner of the desk that he had apparently come in to retrieve, and he stood and he said goodnight and he left. She sat alone in the library with the lamp burning and the October dark pressing against the windows, and she understood that what had just happened was not a dramatic declaration. It was not the sweeping conclusion she had read about in the novels her mother had kept. It was something more ordinary and more real. Two people sitting on opposite sides of a desk, telling each other the truth for the first time, without strategy attached to it. That she thought was the actual beginning. No. The public notice ran in the Maryland Gazette on a Thursday in November. Nathaniel had written it himself. She had read the draft and suggested 2 changes, both of which he accepted without argument. It was a formal statement, under the Blackwood name, acknowledging that the 1811 conviction of Thomas A. Whitaker had been vacated by federal petition, that the conviction had been obtained through the fraudulent manipulation of court evidence, and that the Blackwood family formally and publicly recognized that Thomas A. Whitaker had acted with integrity throughout his involvement in the matter and bore no guilt for the consequences that followed. It ran in full. Every word. By the following week, it had been reprinted in 3 Virginia papers. Abigail held the Gazette in both hands at the breakfast table and read the notice the way she had read the petition document twice, then a 3rd time, as though she needed to make the words real by reading them enough times. Samuel was across from her. He had a copy too. He was not reading it anymore. He was just holding it the way you hold something you have been waiting for so long. The arrival of it is almost more than the waiting. People will talk, Nathaniel said. He was standing near the window with his coffee watching the drive. They're already talking, Abigail said. Some of them will say I destroyed my own family name. Some of them will, she agreed. Others will say my uncle deserved worse. Also true, Samuel said. Nathaniel turned from the window. He looked at both of them, his wife and her brother, at the breakfast table with their newspapers in his house that had been built on a lie and was now piece by piece being rebuilt on something else. My father used to say, Nathaniel said that the Blackwood name was the most valuable thing he owned. He paused. He was right about that. He was wrong about why. Abigail set her paper down. Why then? Because a name is only worth what the people who carry it are willing to do, he said. My father thought it meant authority, precedence, the right to define what the law said about other men. He looked at her directly. You showed me it means something else, that a name is only worth what truth you're willing to put behind it." The room was quiet. Then Samuel said without looking up from his paper, "That might be the most sensible thing a Blackwood has ever said." Nathaniel's mouth moved in the way it sometimes did, not quite a smile, but the genuine precursor to one. "High standard," he said. "Very low bar," Samuel said. Nyum. The last piece came 2 weeks later. A letter arrived from the federal clerk in Washington, formal and brief, notifying them that Judge Elias Blackwood had been formally charged with obstruction of justice and perjury in connection with the Whitaker case. The investigation had found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. He would face the same courtroom machinery he had operated from the elevated position of a judge's bench, but this time from the other side of it. Nathaniel read the letter at his desk and did not say anything for a long time. Then he called for Abigail. She read it standing. She had imagined this moment in various forms over 4 years, imagined it with rage, with triumph, with the particular savage satisfaction of watching a powerful man face consequences. She had imagined it would feel enormous. It felt quiet. It felt like the closing of a door that had been open too long, letting cold air into a room. Not a slamming, just a closing. "It isn't finished," she said. "A charge isn't a conviction." "No," Nathaniel said, "but it is a beginning. He will hire the best defense available." "He will," Nathaniel said, "and the federal court will hear testimony from every person willing to give it, including us." She nodded. "Are you ready for that?" he said. She thought about standing in a courtroom, about saying her father's name in a room with official records and people listening, about being cross-examined by men paid to make her seem unreliable, hysterical, motivated by grief rather than truth. She had been preparing for that room her entire adult life without knowing it. "I was ready," she said, "the year my father died. I've only been gathering evidence since then." Nathaniel held her gaze for a moment. Then he said simply, "I'll be there." She knew what he meant. Not merely present beside her as the Blackwood who stood with the Whitaker, and made clear that the family name was no longer a shield for what the family had done. The weight of that, what it would cost him socially and professionally, was not lost on her. "You understand," she said, "what it means, standing with me in that room." "I understand exactly what it means," he said. "I decided in a study in Washington 4 months ago in front of a federal clerk when I put my father's letters on his desk." He looked at her steadily. "I am not reconsidering." That evening she found her father's original audit report in the library where she kept it. Now not in the iron case, not sewn into a dress, but in a proper document sleeve on the library shelf where documents that belong to the permanent record of a house should be kept. She took it down and brought it to the desk and sat with it in the lamplight and read it one more time. Thomas A. Whitaker's handwriting. Careful, upright, fully formed, his name at the bottom. His assessment clear and plain and honest of a scheme that had tried to use him and failed because he had refused to be used and had been punished for the refusal with the full weight of corrupt authority. She pressed her hand flat over his signature. She sat there for a long time. She thought about the church in Maryland on a summer morning with the doors closed and her brother not arriving, and a man beside her whispering that she would learn to kneel. She thought about the iron case in the cellar, and the letter in the East Room boxes, and the 14 pages of her brother's testimony written in her hand at 2 a.m. with a lamp burning down. She thought about a carriage ride through summer dark, and a man reading letters on a study floor, and a handshake in an entrance hall. She thought about 4 years of banked fury and careful strategy, and the particular cost of being so controlled for so long that people forgot to wonder what you were protecting under it. She lifted her hand from the page. She looked at her father's name. Thomas A. Whitaker. Restored. Vindicated. Written correctly in the permanent record of this country in the language of the law in ink that would not fade for 100 years. She had not bowed at the altar. She had not bowed when they offered her money and called it mercy. She had not bowed when the most powerful man in the county sat across a dinner table and told her that the past was best left in the past. The past was not best left in the past. The past was a ledger, and ledgers required accuracy, and Thomas Whitaker's ledger had been falsified, and she had corrected it with her brother's memory and her own stubborn refusal and the legal weight of a name she had married strategically and was learning to mean. She put the document back in its sleeve. She put it back on the shelf where it belonged. And in Blackwood Hall, on a November evening in 1817, with the law finally written true, and the people who had carried the weight of the lie laid down, still breathing. Abigail Whitaker. Abigail Blackwood stood in her own library and understood that she had never needed anyone's mercy because she had always carried something more powerful than mercy. She had carried the truth, and the truth in the end had been enough.